Paper or instructional patterns are the starting point for most sewing and quilting projects. Yet there are patterns hanging in our closets. They're currently in the shape of ready-made garments. If you've ever wished you could copy a favorite top or blouse or even a skirt, I'd like to share with you 10 starting tips to copy your favorite ready-made garment. You'll need a few tools. First of all, rulers. A French curve or a straight edge ruler. These 4 rulers are part of the Fashion Design ruler set. A 5-in-1 tool will add seam allowances very easily. Importantly, you will need a pinpoint tracing wheel. It will perforate the pattern paper, a mechanical pencil or a pen, and of course some pattern paper to trace your designs. This happens to be one of my favorite tops. It has simple styling, simple lines, and it's going to serve as the garment that I'll copy to show you some of these 10 tips. Tip number 1 is work on a padded surface. On my table, I have an extra length of fabric, and you're going to place this on your cutting table or working table and cover this area with the pattern paper. Tip number 2, always work with the garment wrong side facing you. It's easiest to see the stitching lines from the inside of the garment. Tip 3, copy the largest piece first, usually the center back piece. Tip number 4, establish the center front or the center back. In this case, I'm going to work with the center back piece. Fold the fabric wrong side out and then stack the underarm seams, stacking one on top of the other, and carefully pin at all the intersections. I'm going to place one more pin at the underarm area, again stacking the seam allowances. This will establish the fold. Smooth the fabric over to find the fold at the center back. Place pins along the fold line. Then unpin at the underarm seam and flatten out your new pattern. Tip number 5, find the grain line of all the other pieces. Study the weave of the fabric. It's easy on this blouse because it has a slight dolby weave, but you can see the definite marks of the grain line. The undercolor grain line is going in this direction. As far as the facing grain line, it's following the front of the blouse. It's very easy to find as well as to mark. Tip number 6, trace a basic pattern piece. I'm going to be working on the peplum, the lower skirt area of the blouse. I've added a center line or a line on the pattern tracing paper. I'll align the pins from the center back of the peplum and pin right to the fabric and through the paper. Now use your pinpoint tracing wheel and trace along the hemline, through the stitching line at the side seam, as well as the stitching line at the waistline. Tip number 7, add 5/8 of an inch seam allowances. Unpin your fabric from the tissue paper. You'll see through the perforations. Align the ruler that's 5/8 of an inch wide and add seam allowances all around the edges. Tip number 8, allow room for a dart. If your garment has darts, draw the dart legs before tracing the side seam and the hem. I'll show you how. I have the back piece pinned to my fabric. I've traced the neckline, the armhole, and the shoulder seam areas. The dart is along the waistline. Measure the depth of the dart. The dart measures 3/4 of an inch. Double that measurement. I've already traced the waistline seam and the dart leg where the dart has been sewn. Unpin the fabric from this area. Fold back the fabric and measure out 1.5 inches. Move the pattern, and this time your sewn pattern, so that the dart leg aligns with the second mark on your fabric or on your tissue paper. After you've allowed room for the dart, again flatten out the fabric and continue to trace the seam as well as the side seam. Tip number 9, use your French curve to shape the armhole. When you unpin the fabric from your tissue paper, you'll find perforated lines for the armhole. Align the curve so that it matches the perforation. Just move the curve to whatever you see to mark the stitching line. Then simply add a seam allowance to the edge. Tip number 10, mark all the grain lines on your tissue patterns. Remember marking the pin grain line on your fabric? We'll simply use your pinpoint tracer, trace along the grain line to make certain that you have a grain line marked on your tissue pattern. And these are 10 of my favorite copying techniques. Buy your pattern making tools, supplies, and resource materials at Nancy's Notions today.